once. Because under HE stain, you can't see it. Very difficult. Now, if we use in situ hybridization, it lights up. But under normal histological conditions, unless the pathologist really is looking for it, he will miss it. So we're missing it with PCR, we're missing it with histology. And now we're sending broodstock everywhere. Next. Spore destruction is difficult. Not impossible. Please, journalists, take note. Not impossible. I got in trouble because it came across as it's impossible. It's only difficult. If you don't find destruction with defecation or sun drying. There are reports of microsporidian spores lasting 50 to 60 years in a dry state. Probably not good for farm management. I know from experience that chlorine at 200 ppm is not necessarily effective. I know from experience that ozone is not necessarily effective. There is some confusion about freezing. Some people tell me freezing yes, some people tell me freezing no. It may be we just haven't defined freezing well enough yet. And if this meeting was maybe a week from now, I would answer the question. Next. So, what are some of the outward signs? Well, one of the confusing things is what we're calling this white sheet, these white things. A lot of people think that that's symptomatic of this. I used to think that. I'm not so sure anymore because I see shrimp now all over the world with white things, and I don't think they have EHP. But certainly when you do have EHP, these white sheets are very common. Next. And you can see it in PLs. In fact, this thing will infect in the hatchery in PLs. It can get very badly infected in the hatchery if you got a bad infection. And then you can also see the little white things in infected PLs. That's a pretty good scientific term, little white thing. Don't quote me. Okay? Next. And then white feces, is that or is that not microsporidium? All right, again, we have some divergence of opinion. My opinion is it is. Others, it is not. I have my opinion because I've never seen white feces that did not test positive for EHP. Now, I have seen EHP not produce white feces. But I'll tell you one story. I had an intensive tank, lots and lots of shrimp. They were wide size variation, growing slow. They had EHP, no white feces. Then I had a biofilter failure. I had a spike of nitrite. The next day I had white feces. And we know white feces are associated with bad bottoms. So I think when you have EHP and a bad bottom, you have the conditions to create a super condition of white feces. Opinion, no scientific evidence. Observational. Next. And the other thing that I first noticed, now EHP is not new. Okay, we first saw EHP in Thailand in 2009. And it took us really about until 2010-11 to figure it out enough that we cut it off. So today, you find some EHP in Thailand, but not very much. Now, one of the things I noticed when we started seeing HP, actually I didn't, David Garrigas that works for me did, he saw these worms in the HP that he had never seen before. And they looked like Gregorines. Oh, we showed all these to again, the famous pathologist. Some of them immediately were astute enough to say, there's no nuclei, it can't be a Gregorine. Others would just say, well, we can't see the nuclei, it must be. So we actually took money and you can pick these worms out of the HP. So you can pick a tube full of these things. And we sent it off for genomic analysis, and it came back shrimp. Did that 3 times before we were convinced it really was the shrimp and not some foreign body. I do believe that when you see this, there are EH, or there's the microsporidium involved in the production of these tubules within the HP. So that is one indicator I look for. If I have this in an HP, I'm pretty sure I have microsporidium. Next. EHP directly infects horizontal vertical transmission. Okay, in the hatchery, if your brood animal is infected, it basically will infect the nuclei we always have that fecal to nuclei transmission. It is a fecal to nuclei transmission, so we can infect to the nuclei, then go to the PL, and then go to your farm. Or if you're in the farm, and somehow we just get one or two infected individuals, we can get horizontal transmission through the water. So actually in an experimental condition, I can take an aquarium, I can half it, I can put infected animals here, clean animals here, and in 4 or 5 days, the clean animals are infected through waterborne transmission. It can transmit through spores in a pond. Now this is another rule that I have. If your pond has been infected, it's infected forever until you do something. The spores are in your pond, likewise in your hatchery. Wherever this thing goes, you can be sure they've left a present in the form of spores. And unless you take action to destroy the spores, it will be a continuing, if not accelerating problem. Next. Carriers of microsporidians, well, again, pond-reared broodstock. It's not nuclear breeding. They're exposed. They can carry it. Broodstock feeds. We've seen it in polychaetes, in bivalves. Now, this is passive, okay? Passive means these things are in infected areas, picking it up, and it's passing through their intestinal tract. But it can still infect. Nuclei, infected maturation. PLs from infected nuclei, pond reservoir bottoms. I made this mistake before. I had a problem on a farm. I disinfected the whole farm, and the next cycle I had the problem again. I missed the reservoir. It's in the reservoirs too. You got to disinfect everything. And source water. When you get a neighborhood where everybody's got the disease and everybody's passing the spores into the local water, yeah, it's there too. And now it's going to come back and bite you again. Next. To prevent EHP, we must be clean. Now, this may be pretty simple, but sometimes it may be difficult because in a lot of cases, this requires cooperation. Everybody needs to be clean, otherwise the environment gets dirty. We have to start with the clean broodstock, then go to the clean PLs, then go to the clean farm that has clean water. The whole line of possession has to be clean. Okay, next. To disinfect. Okay, I said it was difficult. It's not impossible. There's ways of disinfecting anything that you come up with. Now, in this case, we're looking at pH because the microsporidian is a chitin wall. Fungus have chitin, and chitin dissolves at high pH. So we can actually dissolve the chitin spore wall, and that destroys it. So here we basically add calcium oxide, which can get your pH very high. Now I must add caution. When you use calcium oxide, this is the same chemical the mafia uses to get rid of evidence. They basically dissolve bodies in this. So you need to make sure your workers understand that if they dip their hand in the calcium oxide, it'll come out a bone. Must be careful. You plow it into the sediment, and then you have to moisten it. We need the reaction. So you need to react it. Get the pH above 12. And then within 1 week, that pH is going to correct again. It's going to come down to levels that you can stop, but without the spores. Next. Now, another thing that we learned, or I learned maybe 3 or 4 years ago on a farm I had, that we always wondered why. Okay, here, this is complicated, and probably if I did this again, I probably should do it easier so that even I can understand it. But this is a non-infected PL. So this is one farm. Some ponds got infected PLs, some ponds got non-infected PLs. So the non-infected has a normal growth curve. The ones that are infected basically had a normal growth curve to 30 days. And then it slows down. So it's normal to 30 days before it goes. Now, why is that? So we set up a program with a real-time PCR to look at DNA amount, which is proportionate to spores, to see if there is a relationship with the concentration of the spore in the HP and its effect on growth or health of the shrimp. And basically we found that below 10 to the 4 levels, there's no effect. There's no disease below 10 to the 4. But as the days go on in the pond, the spore numbers increase, and when the spore numbers increase above 10 to the 4, it starts growing slow. And then if you happen to keep that animal in the pond in 90 days, you'll oftentimes reach 10 to the 9 or 10 to the 8 DNA units. Now at that point, you can actually see some chronic mortality. But most people don't keep it till 90 days. So generally we don't see chronic mortality, we just see slow growth and increasing size variation. Next. Now this is an EMS environment. You don't get one disease or the other. You get both. Most shrimp today we can find Apin's DNA in the stomach, and we can find spores. So it's not, oh, I'm going to have this disease or that disease. They're all mixed in. And also, there's probably some white spot. I just didn't measure that. We're in an EMS environment. Now, the combination of this is kind of interesting. I really don't have anything definitive today, but I think from an observational point of view, it asks some interesting questions. Before EHP got spread all over China, all over Vietnam, all over India, forget India, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, EMS Apin's killed. Now there seems to be a switch to a bigger problem of EHP. But we don't see the early mortality any longer. It's just slow growth. Is there an interesting interaction here? Question to ponder. Next. Are we falling asleep? Haven't started Apin check, you know. Now another observation, and again these observations I made in India, I made in Vietnam, and I made in Thailand, is that if this no infection, my shrimp is going to grow to 28 grams, but as my salinity increases from 0, I get almost no reduction in growth at low salinities, but as they increase, I get a higher effect of the microsporidium. So when I'm in India, even if they're stocking low density at 40 or 50 parts per thousand, very high impact. But if I'm in Thailand and they're stocking 60 and they're at 0, I see almost no impact. So this needs to be confirmed through experimentation. Same way with density. Lower density, less impact. Higher density, higher impact. Next. Management, okay, this is basically what we've just gone through. Start with clean animals. Then you disinfect your pond if you had the disease in there before. Your reservoir, you make sure you get rid of the spores. Now, if it were my farm, I'm not so sure of my own skill. So I'm going to lower my stocking density. So even if I have a few spores left, these animals are going to grow up to 25, 30, 35 grams, and I'll still get a profitable crop. And if I don't get an EHP, then the second crop I go back normal. But at least I hedge with a slightly lower stocking density. And then, again, if you have the option for lower salinity, it's certainly better than high salinity. All right, next. Do we have time to continue? Okay. Apins. Understanding apins. The first thing that I will say, and I understand that most people in Malaysia already understand this, apins is not a vibriosis. It's not a systemic vibriosis. Now, how do I know that? Very simple. If I take a large amount of apins bacteria and I heat kill it, and then I feed the heat killed bacteria to my shrimp, I still get aphids. The histology is there. The disease is there, even with a heat-killed bacteria. But if I take a heat-killed Harveyii and try to infect a shrimp, nothing happens. That's vibriosis. You need a live animal. This, you need a toxin. Whether it's dead or not, the toxin is there. This is a toxicosis. Next. So, a typical aphids challenge. This is, again, just verification of what I said. And if I add the aphids here on day 2, so I get my shrimp acclimated a little bit, I add day 2, wow, rapid death. There's no sickness here. They're alive and dead. And this is the first thing I observed in China in 2009, where I said to myself, this is something different. I would go to ponds, and there would be no sick shrimp. There would be dead shrimp and healthy shrimp. So, very fast. Now, oftentimes you'll look at these challenges, and we'll start seeing dribbling mortality after that. That's from secondary bacterial infections. The survivors sometimes get stressed enough to pick up a secondary bacteria, and that creates the chronic phase. But it's not the primary toxin. That's within 12 hours. It dies. That's another thing that you will find. In a live shrimp, you will never find aphids systemically. You'll never find it in the HP. You'll never find it in the blood. You will only find it in the HP and the blood when that shrimp is next to dead or dead. Next. This is hopefully to illustrate the toxicosis. But essentially, it's like having a cockroach. Imagine this being your shrimp, and we spray the aphids toxin on it, and it's dead. Toxicosis. And in fact, the Peter toxin 1 and 2 are natural insecticides. It really is like spraying your shrimp or your cockroach and killing it. Next. Okay. Initially we called it